Hello, fourth graders, and welcome to your last ELA video for your last week of school for this school year. The skill we're going to be working on this week, so for June 22nd to June 26th, is analyzing plot. So we're going to talk today in our video about the elements of plot. Remember that when you're watching this lesson, keep your packet nearby as well. There's a handy picture of an anchor chart, and then there are some descriptions of the different aspects and elements of plot that will help you when you're doing your independent practice. So what is a plot? If we're going to analyze plot, then we certainly need to be able to say what plot is before we can analyze it. Plot is used to tell a story. All stories must have a plot. If there's no plot, then guess what? There's no story. For there to be a story to tell, something has to change in the story. Think about it like this. If everything stayed the same all the time, there wouldn't be a story, and it definitely wouldn't be very interesting. Some examples of what I mean when I say change within a story. Think about an event that may change. For example, two friends decide to go on a hike. So at the beginning, two friends are standing at the beginning of a hiking trail looking at a map. What changes? Well, they start hiking that trail. Another example of change within a story is when a decision is made. For example, the hikers could decide to take a break and roast some marshmallows. So, at the beginning, the hikers are hiking along their trail. And what changes? They decide to stop. Sometimes in a story, a relationship may change. For example, the hikers could disagree over the best way to roast marshmallows, and they might stop speaking to one another. So their relationship together would change. So if at the beginning they're preparing to roast their marshmallows, what might change between them is they disagree and they stop speaking to one another. Sometimes in a story, a character trait may change. For example, one hiker becomes rude and makes fun of the way the other hiker roasts his marshmallows. So to start, the hikers are roasting their marshmallows. And what changes? One hiker exhibits or shows rude behavior. Sometimes an understanding may change. What we mean by that is the hiker realizes that he was being rude and apologizes to the other hiker. He started out by being rude, and what changed is he or she understands that they were being rude and they apologize to their friends. Think about plots as a trail in the woods. The plot is the map from point A, the beginning, to point B, the end. One thing we often do is map the plot in a story. So we look at what changes within the story from point A to point B. For example, the story of Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. So let's think of this short little story by thinking of that trail in the woods that we just paired. If you think of that trail map, point A is when they're at the bottom of the hill. What changes? They go up the hill. Then Jack falls, which is another change. Then Jill comes tumbling after, so we have yet another change in the plot. And then point B at the bottom of the hill, Jack and Jill are back at the bottom, and they're probably a little bruised and bumped up. In this particular example, the story about Jack and Jill started and ended in the same place. However, it's important to remember that many stories start and end in different places. This was just a short and easier example for us to work with during this mini lesson. So let's talk about those elements of plot that we're going to analyze. All plots have what we consider standard elements. These standard elements always happen in the same sequence. Otherwise, the plot wouldn't make sense. The first element of plot is the exposition. Sometimes you'll hear exposition referred to as the introduction, and we can use those words, what we would say, interchangeably, meaning they mean the same thing. You could use one or the other, but most often you'll hear exposition. The exposition is the beginning of the story. This is where the characters in the setting are introduced to you, the reader. Then we have our rising action. So if you envision, and just like on the anchor chart in your packet, you envision that mountain or that hill. The exposition is at the very bottom. It's the beginning. Then as you're starting to go up that mountain, you have what we call our rising action. This is where the conflict of the story is revealed. It's also where the story becomes more complicated. Next, we have what we know as the climax of the story. So we have our introduction or our exposition, we have our rising action as we start going up that hill, and at the top, we have our climax. This is what we call the turning point of the story. It's the highest point of interest within a story. After that climax, we have what we call our falling action. So we start going back down that mountain. This is where the conflict begins to be resolved. And the events of the story begin to conclude. It's important to remember it's where they begin to be resolved and begin to conclude, but it doesn't mean that it's the end. Lastly, we have our resolution. You'll notice that our resolution is at the very bottom of our mountain on the other side from where we began. This is the end of our story. And this is where the outcome of the conflict is revealed. So your job this week is going to be to read 2 of the books you were given. First one is Stories from Asgard, Norse Myths, and the second book is Adventure on the Amazon River. You're going to use this video, your anchor chart, and the handy dandy notes I provided for you, and you're going to do your daily reading and response prompts. For example, for Monday the 22nd, your job is to describe the introduction or exposition of Stories from Asgard. What does the author write to provide necessary details about the character and setting? And why is this introduction important? On Tuesday, you'll be asked to describe the plot of Stories from Asgard using the 5 elements of plot. It's important to remember that these are not lengthy writing pieces. You don't have to write a whole paragraph to tell me what the exposition is or the climax. These are things that can be said in a simple sentence. So you need to identify that you're talking about the exposition and then tell me what part of the story, what events make up the exposition. So you should have more than enough room to write the responses to these questions because you do not have to write a lot. This is something that can be done simply and how we would say succinctly, which means we don't have to use too many words. We can answer it more simply and more direct. As always, remember to complete your daily checklist and get a parent or guardian signature. And make sure on Friday to send a picture of your response logs for the week. Have a great beginning of the week, girls, and enjoy all these days leading up to the end of our 4th grade year. And I look forward to seeing the hard work you put into learning about plot this week.